You hear a lot of stories. Stories about things that go bump in the night. About creatures in the woods. About ghosts that haunt old houses. And you can listen to them. Get a little chill. And then go about your day because you know. Deep down, they're just stories. Entertainment. This isn't one of those. This is a story about the heat. And about a window I used to leave open. To really understand what happened, you have to understand Los Angeles in the summer of 1985. It wasn't just hot, it was oppressive. It was a physical weight. The heat radiated up from the blacktop in shimmering waves that made the world look like it was melting. It clung to your skin. A slick, greasy film that no shower could truly wash away. It was the kind of heat that baked all the energy out of you, leaving you lazy and slow and perpetually thirsty. I was 22 that summer, living in a small, rented bungalow in Glendale. It was the kind of place you can only afford when you're young and have low standards, peeling stucco. A patch of brown grass out front I optimistically called a lawn. And a window air conditioning unit in the living room that rattled like a dying man but produced, at best, a lukewarm breeze. It wasn't much, but it was mine, my little corner of the world, just off the 134 freeway. My life was simple, almost painfully normal. I worked at a video rental store in Burbank. A job that was less about a career and more about getting paid to talk about movies and have access to free rentals. My girlfriend, Sarah, was taking summer classes at UCLA. Our days fell into a comfortable, sun-drenched rhythm. Work, beach trips in her sputtering VW Rabbit, cheap dinners at Tommy's, and late nights watching movies, trying to soak up the cool air from that wheezing AC unit. We felt safe. You always do. Before, the world's dangers were things that happened on the 10 o'clock news. To other people in other places. Our bungalow, with its creaky floors and mismatched furniture, was a sanctuary. It was our fortress against the world, an impenetrable bubble of youth and optimism. The news back then was filled with the usual stuff: Reagan, the Cold War, the rising price of gas. But another story started to creep in around the edges, like a stain spreading on a map. At first, they called him the Valley Intruder. The reports were sporadic, confusing. A break-in here, an assault there. The details were murky, spoken in the hushed, serious tones of news anchors. It was background noise, the kind of thing you hear while you're making coffee. A distant tragedy that didn't really register. It was happening in the San Fernando Valley, which, to anyone living in LA, can feel like a different country. It wasn't my neighborhood. It wasn't my problem. I remember one night, Sarah and I were watching the thing on VHS. The AC was fighting a losing battle, so I had the bedroom window cracked open. It was a big, single-pane sash window that faced the narrow, dark walkway between my house and my neighbor's. It was the only way to get any kind of cross breeze. "You should lock that," Sarah said, pulling a blanket up to her chin despite the heat. On screen, Kurt Russell was facing down the shape-shifting alien. "It's 100 degrees in here," I said. "Besides, the screen is in. No one's getting through that." She just looked at me. "Still, the news, that's in the valley," I said, dismissively. "We're fine here." She let it go. We finished the movie, and I fell asleep to the sound of crickets and distant traffic. The sheer curtains stirring in the faint, warm breeze coming through that open window. It was a sound I associated with peace, with safety. That was the first mistake. Believing a flimsy piece of mesh was a barrier. The first red flag, as they say, wasn't a bang or a scream. It was a sound so small, so insignificant, that I almost didn't notice it. It happened about a week after that conversation with Sarah. I was in bed alone. She was studying late at her dorm, and I was hovering in that space between wakefulness and sleep. The house was settled. The night was quiet. And then I heard it. A single, soft thump from outside the bedroom window. My eyes snapped open in the darkness. I lay perfectly still, listening. My heart was doing a slow, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. Thump. It wasn't a sharp sound. It was dull, heavy, like a bag of oranges being dropped on the soft dirt of the walkway. I held my breath, straining my ears. Silence. The crickets had stopped. That was the thing that really pricked at the back of my neck. The sudden, absolute absence of that familiar, nightly chirping. It was a heavy, listening kind of silence. It's just a cat, I told myself. A raccoon knocking over the garbage can. But the garbage cans were on the other side of the house. Maybe a branch fell from Mrs. Gable's lemon tree. I slowly, carefully, pushed myself up on my elbows. The window was a pale gray rectangle in the gloom. The curtains unmoving. The breeze had died. I stared at that rectangle for what felt like an hour. Every muscle tensed, waiting for another sound. Nothing. Eventually, the crickets started up again. One by one, as if a switch had been flipped. The tension in my shoulders eased. I told myself I was being paranoid. My brain playing tricks on me from watching too many horror movies at work. I lay back down, pulled the sheet up to my chin, and forced myself to sleep. The next morning, I glanced out the window. The walkway was empty, no fallen branches, nothing out of place. It was easy to dismiss. It was just a noise. But for the first time, I locked the window before I left for work that day. A few days later came the second flag. This one was harder to rationalize. I came home from a late shift. Around midnight, I pulled my beat-up Toyota Celica into the driveway, killed the engine, and sat for a moment in the ticking silence. The walkway between my house and my neighbor's was shrouded in deep shadow. A black slash against the moonlit stucco. As I walked to my front door, fumbling for my keys, I noticed the garden hose. It was an old, green rubber hose I kept coiled next to the spigot on the side of the house. Right at the entrance to that dark walkway. Except now, it wasn't coiled. It was stretched out, snaking its way down the path into the darkness. As if someone had started to pull it towards the back of the house and then just dropped it. I stopped, my keys in my hand. I stared at the hose. I knew, with the kind of certainty you can't explain, that I hadn't left it like that. I was meticulous about coiling it. It was one of those dumb little habits you develop living on your own. My dad had always been a stickler for it. Someone will trip on it. Leo, always coil the hose. My first thought wasn't fear. It was annoyance. Teenagers, I thought, cutting through the yard again. But as I stood there, a cold dread started to seep into my gut. The walkway was a dead end, blocked by a fence at the back. There was nowhere to cut through to. I took a step closer. The air in the mouth of the walkway felt different, colder, stagnant, and there was a smell. It was faint, but it was there. It wasn't the sweet smell of Mrs. Gable's night-blooming jasmine or the dusty smell of the dry soil. It was a strange, foul odor. It was metallic, like old pennies, but also thick and vaguely rotten, like meat left in the sun for too long. It was the smell of bad hygiene, of decay. My hand tightened on my keys, the metal digging into my palm. I had a sudden, vivid image of someone standing just beyond the reach of the light. In the deepest part of that shadow, watching me. I could feel it, a prickling sensation on my skin. The kind of biological alarm system that screams predator. I didn't investigate. I didn't call out. I practically ran to my front door, jammed the key in the lock, and threw myself inside, slamming and locking it behind me. I stood with my back against the wood, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my heart hammering. I leaned over and peeked through the blinds. The walkway was just a strip of black. Nothing moved. I spent the rest of the night on the couch in the living room, with every light in the house on and the TV playing for noise. I told myself it was kids. I told myself the smell was a dead animal under the house. I tried to build a wall of logic around the fear, but it was a flimsy defense. Because deep down, I knew someone had been there. Someone had stood in that narrow space, just feet from my bedroom window, and pulled on my garden hose. And I had no idea why. By this point, the Valley Intruder story had exploded. It was the lead on every newscast. They had a new name for him now. One that felt more sinister, more primal. The Night Stalker. The details of his crimes were becoming clearer, and they were the stuff of nightmares. He didn't have a type. He attacked men, women, children. He came in through unlocked doors and open windows. He was brutal, sadistic, and worst of all, he was random. He left behind pentagrams, scrawled in lipstick on the walls of his victims' homes. The city changed. The lazy, sun-baked complacency of a month ago was gone, replaced by a current of raw panic. Gun stores sold out of handguns. Locksmiths were booked for weeks. People started sleeping with baseball bats and golf clubs by their beds. The hardware store where I bought a new, heavy-duty deadbolt for my front door and a Charlie bar for the sliding glass door in the back was a zoo. The faces of the people in line were tight, pinched with anxiety. We were all buying the same things. We were all thinking the same thing. The heat didn't let up. If anything, it got worse. A suffocating blanket of hot, smoggy air that made closing and locking every window feel like a death sentence. People had a choice. Risk suffocation in their own homes. Or risk him. I tried to act normal for Sarah. I didn't tell her about the hose or the smell. I didn't want to terrify her. But she could see it in my eyes. I was jumpy, constantly checking the locks, flinching at every sound the old house made. Maybe we should stay at my dorm for a while, she suggested one night. Her room was on the 3rd floor. It's safer. My pride, stupid and fragile, wouldn't let me. No, I said, a little too sharply. This is my house. I'm not going to be scared out of my own home. But I was terrified. The 3rd flag was the one that broke me. It was the point where all my attempts at rationalization crumbled into dust. It was a Tuesday night in late July. I remember the date because it was the day they released the first composite sketch of the killer. It was on every channel. On the front page of the Times. A gaunt, shadowy face with hollow cheeks, intense eyes, and a cruel-looking mouth. He looked like a ghost. A wraith conjured from the city's collective fear. The police warned that he was armed and extremely dangerous. That night, the heat was unbearable. It felt like trying to breathe in an oven. I had every fan in the house going. But all they did was push the hot air around. I was lying on top of my covers, sweating, staring at the ceiling. The bedroom window was shut tight. The lock fastened. It felt stuffy and claustrophobic. But the alternative was unthinkable. Around 2 a.m., I drifted off into a light, uneasy sleep, and I had a dream. I dreamt that I was paralyzed in my bed, and a tall, thin man was standing in the corner of my room, just watching me. He was all angles and shadows, and his teeth were long and rotten. In the dream, I could smell him. It was that same smell from the walkway, coppery and foul. He just stood there, unmoving, and I remember the sheer, abject terror of not being able to scream. I woke up with a jolt, gasping for air. My t-shirt was soaked with sweat, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. The room was empty. The only sound was the drone of the fan. It was just a nightmare, I told myself, my voice a ragged whisper in the dark. The sketch, the news, it's getting to you. I swung my legs out of bed, needing to walk it off. I went to the kitchen to get a glass of water, my bare feet sticking to the linoleum floor. As I stood at the sink, I glanced at the back of the house, at the sliding glass door that led to the small, postage stamp-sized backyard, and my blood ran cold. The Charlie bar, the thick metal rod I had wedged in the track of the door to keep it from being opened from the outside, was not in the track. It was lying on the floor, about a foot away from the door. I stared at it. My mind refused to process what I was seeing. It was impossible. I had put it there myself before I went to bed. I checked it every single night. It was part of my ritual. Lock the front door, lock the back door, wedge the Charlie bar, check the windows. Every night, someone had moved it. My breath hitched. My gaze slowly traveled up the glass of the door. And there, on the outside of the glass, at about eye level, was a handprint. It was a greasy, smeared print, the kind of mark left by someone pressing their face and hands against the glass to peer inside. And below it, drawn in the condensation on the pane, was a shape. It wasn't perfect. It was just a crude, 5-pointed star. I felt the strength go out of my legs and I stumbled back, catching myself on the kitchen counter. My whole body was trembling. This wasn't a dream. This wasn't my imagination. The man from my nightmare, or someone like him, had been in my backyard. He had been at my door. He had stood right there, just a pane of glass away from me. And he had looked into my house. How did he move the bar? My mind was racing, trying to find a logical answer. Could he have jiggled the door hard enough to make it fall out? It was possible. The track was old. Maybe it had enough give. It was a flimsy hope. But it was all I had. The other possibility was too monstrous to contemplate. That the sound that woke me up wasn't from a dream. That someone had already gotten inside, moved the bar, and then, what? Gotten spooked? Changed their mind? I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I grabbed the biggest kitchen knife I owned and sat on the floor in the corner of the living room, watching the doors and windows, my eyes burning with exhaustion and terror. Every creak of the house, every passing car, every rustle of leaves was him, coming back to finish the job. The sun finally rose, painting the sky in pale shades of pink and orange, but it brought no comfort. The light didn't feel safe anymore. It just illuminated how vulnerable I was. The next day, I called in sick to work. I went to a gun shop in Pasadena and bought a 12-gauge shotgun. I had never held a gun before in my life. The weight of it was terrifying, but the fear of being defenseless was worse. I bought a box of shells and took it home. I didn't tell Sarah. How could I explain that our little bungalow had become a war zone? That I was now sleeping with a loaded shotgun next to my bed? The city was in a full-blown panic. The news was a 24/7 feed of terror. They released more details about the killer. He was tall, gaunt, usually wore dark clothing and an AC/DC baseball cap. He had horribly decayed, gapped teeth. The description sent a fresh wave of ice through my veins. The man in my dream. The gaunt figure I had half glimpsed in the shadows. I became a prisoner in my own home. I only went out for work, and I started taking different routes every day. When I was home, I kept the shotgun within arm's reach. I papered over the glass on the back door. I nailed my bedroom window shut. My little bungalow was no longer a sanctuary, it was a tomb. It was a trap. I was living on a knife's edge of paranoia. I lost weight. Dark circles formed under my eyes. I snapped at Sarah when she tried to tell me I was overreacting. You weren't there, I yelled at her once, my voice cracking. You didn't see the handprint. Our relationship, once so easy and bright, was fracturing under the strain of my terror. She didn't understand, and I couldn't make her. I felt completely, utterly alone. The climax, when it came, was not a violent confrontation. It was something quieter, and in many ways, far more horrifying. It was late August. The fear had become a part of my daily life. A low hum of anxiety just beneath the surface. I had fallen into a new, grim routine. Come home, lock everything, load the shotgun, and sit, waiting. One night, I was dozing in the armchair in the living room, the TV on low. I had the shotgun resting on my lap. Sometime after midnight, a sound pulled me from my light sleep. It was a quiet, rhythmic scraping. Scrape, pause, scrape, pause. It was coming from the side of the house. From my bedroom. I sat bolt upright, my hands instantly gripping the shotgun. My blood turned to ice water. The sound was methodical, patient. It was the sound of a knife blade being drawn slowly and deliberately across a window screen. He was back. All the air left my lungs. My entire world shrank to that single, terrifying sound. Scrape, scrape. He was cutting the screen I had once believed was a barrier. He didn't know I had nailed the window shut behind it. He was trying to get in the same way he always did. I couldn't breathe. My mind was a blizzard of pure, white-hot panic. This was it. He was here. The man from the news. The ghost with the rotten teeth. He was just a few feet away. On the other side of that wall. Slowly, silently, I slid off the chair and onto the floor. I crawled on my hands and knees, the rough fibers of the carpet scratching my skin. The shotgun felt impossibly heavy. I made my way down the short hallway towards the bedroom, my movements clumsy and jerky with adrenaline. I stopped at the doorway of the bedroom, pressing myself flat against the wall. The scraping stopped. The silence that followed was the most terrifying thing I have ever experienced. It was absolute. It was profound. It felt like the entire world was holding its breath, waiting. I could hear the blood roaring in my ears. A frantic, pulsing rhythm. And then, I heard a new sound. It was the soft, creaking sound of pressure being applied to the window frame. He had cut through the screen and was now trying to slide the window open. I heard a muffled grunt of frustration as it refused to budge. He knows I'm here, I thought. The realization hit me like a physical blow. He knows I nailed it shut. He knows I'm inside. I huddled against the wall, making myself as small as possible, trying to control my ragged breathing. I could hear him. I could hear the faint whisper of his breath. The rustle of his clothing as he shifted his weight. He was so close, an arm's length away, separated by a thin layer of stucco and wood. I pictured him out there in the dark walkway. The gaunt face from the sketch. The dead eyes. The cruel mouth twisted in a snarl of frustration. I could smell him again. That faint, foul odor of decay, seeping through the walls, through the very air. Then came the tapping. Tap, tap, tap. It was on the glass of the window pane. A light, almost playful, three-fingered tap. It wasn't the sound of someone trying to break in. It was the sound of someone trying to get my attention. It was a summons. He was playing with me. He wanted me to know he was there. He wanted me to be afraid. My mind shattered. The last vestiges of rational thought evaporated, replaced by a primal, animal terror. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't wait for him to find another way in. To smash the glass. To kick down the door. The house was no longer a fortress, it was a coffin. My only thought was escape. I scrambled backwards, away from the bedroom, the shotgun bumping uselessly against the floor. I crab walked into the living room, my eyes wide, fixed on the front door. It was my only way out. But to get to it, I had to cross the open space of the living room. I had to expose myself to the windows that faced the street. I took a breath and I ran. It was only 10 feet, but it felt like a mile. I fumbled with the deadbolt, my fingers slick with sweat, my hands shaking so violently I could barely fit the key in the lock. Behind me, I heard a loud thud as he slammed his shoulder against the side of the house in rage. The lock turned. I ripped the door open and sprinted out into the night. I didn't look back. I just ran. I ran down the driveway, my bare feet slapping against the asphalt. I ran into the middle of the street, my chest burning, and I just kept going. I didn't stop until I was 2 blocks away, collapsed behind a hedge in a stranger's yard, gasping for air, the shotgun lying in the grass beside me. I lay there for I don't know how long, shaking uncontrollably, until the terror finally subsided enough for me to call the police from a payphone. They came. They took my statement. I sounded like a lunatic, babbling about handprints and smells and tapping on the window. They found the long, clean slash in the window screen. They found a scuffed boot print in the soft dirt of the walkway. But that was it. No suspect. No real evidence. To them, it was just another attempted burglary in a city gripped by fear. "You probably scared him off when you ran out," one of the officers said, trying to be reassuring. "You got lucky, kid." I didn't feel lucky. I felt violated. I felt marked. I never spent another night in that bungalow. I packed a bag that morning, with the police still there, and I left. I stayed with Sarah, then with my parents. I sold my furniture, broke the lease, and I never went back. A few days later, on August 31st, 1985, the city let out a collective sigh of relief. They had caught him, the Night Stalker. His name was Richard Ramirez. And it wasn't the police who caught him. It was a group of citizens in East LA who recognized him from his picture in the paper and chased him down, beating him until the cops arrived. His face was everywhere, on TV, on the front page of every newspaper. A mugshot of a man with wild, staring eyes, a gaunt face, and a defiant sneer that revealed a row of horribly stained, broken, and gapped teeth. I saw the picture and I felt like I was going to be sick. It was him. It was the man from my dream. It was the face that belonged to the shadows in my walkway. To the foul smell, to the handprint on my door, to the patient, scraping knife, to the playful tap on my window. The stories that came out during his trial were a litany of unspeakable horrors. The details of his crimes, the things he did to people in the sanctity of their own homes, were worse than anything I could have ever imagined. And with every new detail, my blood ran colder as I realized what had been waiting for me on the other side of that wall. The boot print they found in my walkway matched the ones found at other crime scenes. He had been there. I hadn't imagined it. He wasn't trying to scare me. He was trying to get to me. That night, I wasn't an over-imaginative kid spooked by the news. I was a target. I was next on his list. The only thing that saved me was a few nails in a window frame and a blind, panicked sprint into the night. It's been almost 40 years. Richard Ramirez died in prison. Los Angeles recovered. The heat of that summer broke. People unlocked their windows again. Life went on. But not for me. Not really. I don't live in California anymore. I live in a place where it gets cold. Where the seasons change. I live on the 5th floor of an apartment building with a doorman. I have never, not once, lived on a ground floor since that summer. I check the locks on my doors 3 times before I go to bed. I don't like the dark. I don't like silence. And some nights, when the air is still and hot, I can still smell it. That faint, coppery, rotten smell. I didn't get hurt. He never touched me, but he marked me all the same. Because the truest horror isn't the monster that gets you. It's the one that doesn't. It's the one that shows you, with absolute certainty, that the flimsy locks and thin walls of your life are no match for the evil that walks in the night. It's the knowledge that you were looked at, chosen, and that only dumb, blind luck kept you from becoming another story on the 10 o'clock news. It's the lingering, ice-cold question that I will take with me to my grave. What if I hadn't nailed that window shut?